Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here with RC Driver. Now, if you've been doing your research trying to find the right 110 scale four-wheel drive electric monster truck for you, I'm about to make your life a little bit more difficult, or perhaps even easier after this review is done. What I have for you today is the Redcat Racing Dukono Pro, and this is a pretty cool looking monster truck. I'm pretty excited to check it out, so why don't I rip this thing out of the box and we'll go over it together. Alright, so tearing everything out of the box didn't take too long because there's not much in there. We've got the radio system, we've got some instructions, and of course the assembled truck here. And I'm just going to dive right into it, and let's start off with the looks of this truck. And I think it looks pretty neat. I like the styling of the body. It's kind of got this aggressive hood on here and, you know, some pretty simple graphics, but effective graphics. And, you know, simple decals with the Redcat logo on it. It looks like a fun monster truck just by the body alone. All right, now let's start looking at some of the details on it. And it's got a aggressive monster truck style bumper. I like that it's a defined bumper, unlike some other vehicles out there just have a basic bumper up front. You know, we've got some faux lights and some hooks for D-rings, which aren't there. Looks like you could even put some LED lights in it. That's pretty neat as well. Let me flip around to the rear of the vehicle, and no bumper in the rear, but we do have this big wheelie bar. And I like the wheelie bar because it's got this big fat wheel on the back of it. And it does have ball bearings in the wheel, which, hey, I love ball bearings anywhere in a vehicle, and in a wheelie bar, that's pretty neat. The wheelie bar is adjustable. There's some screws up top here, so you can adjust how far you want the wheel down, depending on how high you want your wheelies to be. Now, while we're on the outside as well, why don't we talk about the wheels and tires on it? And it's got these really neat spoked wheels on here. There's kind of like some fake rivets on the rim, but the black spokes on here look very cool. 12mm hex, and these chevron tires are also pretty neat. Like the look of those, and they kind of feel pretty firm. I bet you they're going to squeal on asphalt. That should be a lot of fun, but they should definitely tear up the dirt and the grass. All right, now let's pop the body off and see what's under the hood. There we go, and this, hey, this looks very cool, guys. Check this out. So this is a high CG chassis here, but let's start off with the front. And what my eye just goes right to are these large bore shocks on here. Like the look of those. They even have bleeder screws on the caps. I like that setup. And the bodies on here are actually aluminum, and they have an aluminum collar here for the springs. So that's a pretty neat setup. Like the way it looks. Nice long travel there. Actually feels kind of on the soft side, actually. Very soft for a monster truck. Thought that would be a little firmer, so we'll see how that fares out on the dirt and jumps and stuff like that. But let's move on to the shock towers. So we've got composite shock towers, both front and rear on the vehicle. And you know what? I should probably just talk about the front and rear at the same time because they're literally the same. It's a duplicate setup in the rear, just flipped around, so the tie rods for the toe are fixed to the chassis, where in the front they're fixed to the steering. So let me just talk about the suspension in general. The arms look pretty good, pretty on the firm side actually. I thought they would be soft because I checked out some other Redcat vehicles and those are pretty soft, but these are pretty firm. I actually like that for my style of driving. It feels a little bit more performance oriented. I like the way the caster blocks look on here. Might be a little on the thin side for bashing. We'll have to see how that goes. The steering knuckles on here are also composite plastic, and it looks like they house some ball bearings that support the axle. So there we go again, guys. Ball bearings, very cool. And the axles on here are actually universal drive shafts, steel drive shafts, and that is really nice to see, even in the rear. So we've got them front and rear, which is just great. I love it when they have universal axles on these CV style universal axles. Those are my favorite, whenever I see those on a vehicle. Definitely like that. And those universals go up to the steel out drive. So we've got gear differentials, front and rear. And these are definitely grease filled because this is very light. It's easy to spin. So those are definitely grease filled gear differentials, all metal. And one thing I kind of missed when I was talking about the suspension, but there's one point that I like to talk about, is it does have an aluminum brace between the hinge pins. Just definitely wanted to throw that out to you guys. Didn't want to miss that. But anyway, back to the drivetrain on here. So we've got a metal outdrive from the bevel pinion in the gear case here, composite gear case that runs back to the spur gear here, and then the spur gear mates up with the rear bevel pinion setup. So, nice compact, looks like a simple setup. And let's just talk about the motor plate while I'm back here. This is an aluminum motor plate to support the motor. Definitely like the materials that are used here. Now let's move on to the electronics package. Now that motor that's attached to that aluminum motor plate is a 3300 kV motor. It is a sensorless brushless motor. Very cool anodizing on there. It has the Redcat logo, and that makes up with this brushless speed controller, Hobbywing based brushless speed controller, waterproof, 60 amp, and perfect for ready to run use, already fitted with a Dean's plug. We'll move up to the Hexfly servo here. It is waterproof, looks like it has a metal output gear, and it should be high torque, probably something over 100 inches of torque on there, but hopefully, it'll get these wheels turned on this monster truck. The receiver is buried here inside of this radio box, so that's nice that it's covered. And back up front to the steering servo has a link that goes from the top down through the chassis to the twin crank steering. And of course, the steering has a servo saver built into it. And then the cranks go from the drag link out to the steering knuckles with adjustable tie rods. So we could adjust toe on here. We could even adjust camber. They've got metal tie rods front and rear. So I like the setup on here. I like the use of materials. I like that this truck has adjustability. The only thing I didn't like, guys, and I was checking this out prior to making the video, was the rear. Because we're using tie rods in the rear, there is this active toe, so you can kind of see the tire toe in as it's compressed. I probably would have liked just seen a H-arm in the rear with a standard hub instead of that tie rod, but we'll see how it works. It could be totally fine out there when we're driving it, so I definitely want to leave my impressions up to testing the vehicle. All right, the final thing here is the chassis itself. There's plenty of room to mount whatever battery you want in here. 2S, 3S. It's got these nice Velcro straps, makes getting to the battery nice and easy. Looks like there's plenty of bracing in the composite chassis to make it strong. And yes, it certainly does feel pretty strong. And let's flip it over now. Just check out the bottom side of it. Got these nice skids on the bottom here. Should just glide over a lot of dirt and rocks and stuff as you're bashing. And again, guys, I really like the way this truck looks. I believe this is one of Redcat's newer offerings. This hasn't been out, too long, but I have seen it around. I have definitely had my eye on it, and I really, really want to drive it. So let's head outside now, and we'll see how this thing does, ripping up some dirt and launching off of jumps. Alright, so here's the deal. If you like to do wheelies, then this is the truck for you. Because all it does is just throw the nose up in the air and rides wheelies everywhere. Whether you're in the dirt, on the grass, on pavement. It is just a wheelie monster, and I just love the way it drove. It was just wheeling everywhere, and it just put a huge smile on my face. I knew before I sat down on the bench here that's exactly what I was going to say, because it was just so much fun, just ripping back and forth all over the place, just ripping wheelies everywhere. But that's not the only thing this thing could do. It's a lot of fun in the speed department as well, because it has so much power. It just flies, and it is a really, really fast monster truck. I was running it on 3S, so that was part of the reason why it had so much power. It just rocks out there. It is completely awesome to drive and just do speed runs and stuff like that. Onto the handling actually of it is really good too. It was going through a lot of rough stuff that I thought was just going to buck this thing up into the air and just send it tumbling, but for the most part the suspension just soaked up everything. And of course I flipped it over a bunch of times, but for the most part it was just going through so much stuff and just landing on all four wheels and kept going. So I did like the handling, and I kind of said something about these rear tie rod setup, how it kind of gives you some active tow really as you're driving it, but I don't think that really was a huge problem, and I don't think if you're just fooling around it's gonna even come up on your radar. Onto steering wise, it's got a bit of an understeer to it. It takes some wide turns, and it's a basher truck, so that's totally cool. Just let off the throttle, hit the brake, and you could get this thing whipped around. But if you're on power, on loose surfaces and stuff like that, you expect your turns to be pretty wide. You can see this thing is just covered in dirt. I was just going through mud, just blasting through mud and stuff like that, and it just hitting big rocks, and everything is kind of chipped up in the front. And the body is just covered in dirt, but there was no overheating. I mean, this thing was pretty caked with mud when I was done. I've cleaned it a little bit, but no overheating or anything like that. And just overall, a really fun experience. You could even do backflips with this. It's got so much power, so much bottom end power to it. Backflips shouldn't be a problem. And if you're just looking for a great vehicle for backyard or just a big dirt lot or something like that, I mean, this thing is just going to deliver a lot of action. Now, there is a problem with this truck. One small problem. There's a little bit of bottom end lag with the speed controller and motor. Maybe you saw it a little bit in the action footage there. But right at the bottom, when you pull the trigger, there's a little bit of hesitation and cogging. If you kind of roll over or spin around to where it backs up, the speed controller has to get back in phase, and then it goes just fine. But there's just that little kind of hesitation on the bottom there. The other thing is, and you need to be aware of this, is I really think that the shock towers are pretty weak on this thing. The good news is they offer aluminum shock towers for it, so I recommend that if you get this truck, you get the aluminum towers. But I broke 2 shock towers on this, 2 front shock towers. One was my fault. I was running it without the body, and the body does take some shock when you roll over and stuff like that. The other one happened when I was just going full throttle through a field, and it just started cartwheeling. And I mean, it cartwheeled pretty far, and then the front shock tower broke that time as well. So I'm going to say they're weak. So what's nice is, again, Redcat has aluminum options for it, and I think once you put those on there, I would get them for the front and rear. Once you do that, you're good to go with this thing. I don't think it requires any other option parts, and you'll just have a ton of fun with it. You don't have to worry about anything breaking like that anymore. But again, handling's awesome, speed is incredible, wheelies. This is just a really, really fun machine, and I was excited to test it. I like the look of this truck. I think it's very cool. And if you think it's cool, I think you should pick it up for your first vehicle or add it to your collection too.